Welcome back. As most radio amateurs come to realise, one of the main joys and sometimes frustrations of our hobby are the dramatic effects that propagation can have on making QSOs. Fortunately, it's not entirely unpredictable, as one of the key roles of the RSGB's teams is to compile a weekly forecast of likely propagation across the bands and publish it as part of the weekly GB2RS news. With us now to explain how this is done is the chair of the RSGB Propagation Studies Committee, Steve Nichols, G0KYA. Good to see you, Steve. Can you give us a quick flavour of what you'll be covering today?
Yeah, well, we're going to look at the history of GB2RS, how long it's been running and why, what we've changed over the past 5-6 years to make it more relevant, and then some of the difficulties we gather or come across doing HF, VHF and Moonbounce propagation reports. So hopefully people will get a better idea of how we go about it. And I can tell you some of the problems we have.
Well, all right, we look forward to that, Steve. And before your presentation, a reminder that if you're watching this on Saturday, the 15th of April, then this is live. And you can ask Steve questions or make comments on YouTube chat at any time during his presentation or straight afterwards. Please include your first name and call sign if you have one within every message. And note that you can make this video stream fill your screen on most devices, usually by double clicking on the picture or pressing the full screen button. But now back to Steve to find out how the propagation prediction report is produced.
Okay, thanks, David. Well, as I said, the GB2RS actually started in 1955. I didn't realise it was that old in a way. And the GPO originally said that the broadcast could be made on Sundays on 3.5 to 3.8 megacycles. I do like that, megacycles, not megahertz. And then 40 meters, 7 megs came on board in 1956. And in fact, the propagation segment was produced by Neil, G0CAS, and Martin, G3USF, for more than 20 years. And I'm sorry to say that we heard this week that Martin has gone silent key. So it's quite timely, this. But originally, the propagation segment just consisted of solar factual data and the solar forecast. So when I came along and said I would take it over, we had lots of questions. People were saying, what's all this BZ stuff? What are nanoteslas? Can we make it more relevant to radio users? Can we include VHF? Can we include HF predictions? Oh, and by the way, don't make it any longer. So that was the difficulty we had, is that how do you keep it within about 500 words and cover all this? So I think the first decision I made was to try and make it more relevant to amateur radio, or to make it more relevant, to the communication side of it, and less of the solar factual data. And we've been doing this now for about 3 years or so. So nobody's complained yet. So we'll see. But I'd just like to go through how we do it and some of the problems we come across. Well, currently the thing is really split into four. I do the HF part. Jim, G3YLA, looks at the VHF and UHF side, and also between May and September he runs the Sporadic E side of the bulletin as well. And then we have a separate piece on EME, Aurora and Meteor Scatter, which is produced by John, G4BAO, or Sam, G4DDK. So we're very lucky to have some real experts in this. I mean, Jim is a professional meteorologist, and Sam and John, what they know about EME, what they've forgotten about EME, I could write on the back of an envelope, I think. So it's very useful. So this is how we do it, and we really produce it on Thursdays. It comes out on Thursdays. Jim, don't ask me why, but he likes working through the night. So he generally tends to produce his piece about 1 o'clock in the morning on Thursday morning. So at least we've got that to start with on Thursdays. Then I had the HF part, and John, we have a shared Google document. That's how it's done. And John adds his, and then we pass it on to RSGB on Thursday afternoon. So you can immediately see the problem in that it's produced on Thursday, but it's going to be read out on Sunday, and then it's got to run for the next 7 days or the week after that. So it's really like looking into a crystal ball, to be honest. And as someone said to me recently, the trouble with predictions is they're very difficult, especially if they're about the future. So this that gives you some idea of what we have to go through. But if we look at HF first of all, this is the bit I do. Well, we get access to lots of data. We have current conditions. We can look at HF. We can look at last week's solar flux index, K indices, and other events like flares. I've put the links. Oh, by the way, I've put this presentation live about 10 minutes ago on my Blogspot page. So g0kya.blogspot.com. I think it's .com or .co.uk. So if anyone wants to download it to get some of these URLs, they're more than welcome to do that. And I'll say the URL at the end as well. So anyway, back to this. So we rely very heavily on NOAA and the Space Weather Prediction Center data in America. I've also spoken with the Met Office, because the Met Office has a space weather department now. And the only problem with that is they only forecast 4 days in advance. So really, we need to be able to look forward about 10 days, I think, from Thursday onwards. So that's where the first difficulty lies, really. So first thing to do is to use, as I said, Space Weather Prediction Center has a 27-day advance guide to what they think the solar flux index and solar flare activity, or the KP index, actually, the geomagnetic conditions are going to be. And so that's the first stop to see what they say. And then solarhand.com is a very, very useful resource from V3EN. This is really a kind of a go-to resource because it gives you real-time information on what's actually happening in terms of space weather. So we've got sunspot numbers, we've got K indices, we've got solar wind speed, all this information. And this is all really brought together to work out what we're going to say for the next week. As I said, the 27-day outlook of the space weather prediction information is there. The United States Air Force also produce a 45-day AP index and 10.7 centimeter flux forecast. That's the SFI forecast. They don't always agree with each other, which is interesting, but it's a start anyway. It gives us an idea of what's going to happen over the next 27 days, or the next week at least. And we can also look back to see what happened 27 days ago, because the sun rotates on average 27 days. So if we had really, really bad conditions due to a coronal hole or something 27 days ago, there's a fair chance that 27 days later, conditions will not be good again. So this is another look into the crystal ball, if you like, to see what we can do about it. But just to look at this, let's have a look at the Space Weather Prediction Center. This is what really gets me. This is what they predict, and I've charted back to look at what has actually happened. So you can see there from February at the bottom there, 130s was the SFI prediction. The actual one was 152 to 169 in that week. Then 125 to 145, and it was 159, 182. So actual predictions have been better. Actual conditions have been better than the predictions. But then we go up a little bit. The prediction 170, 185. It was actually 134, 143. In other words, I think you can soon see that the Space Weather Prediction Center predictions are not terribly accurate, to be honest. Now, is this really a problem? Well, I think it's interesting to know what's going on with the sun, but it's not essential to know this if you're using a propagation prediction program such as VOACAP or PROPI, which is the ITU RHF prop program, because they are advised to use predicted or smooth sunspot numbers. Smooth sunspot numbers are averaged out over a long period of time. So that's the recommendation, and they're meant to be more accurate with the smooth figures. In other words, you shouldn't really use live solar flux index or solar sunspot number figures for prediction programs. You have to use the smooth one, and that's where we really start from. But then there's a confusion there, because there are at least 6 ways of smoothing them, to be honest, including the standard method, McNeish and Lincoln, Kalman, and then combined methods as well. So where do you go from there? Well, I think we can only give an indication, therefore, of what space weather is doing at the moment. And I think we use GB2RS now as an educational tool as much as anything to describe that if the K index goes up, HF conditions get bad, or if we know that the critical frequency is going to be X this week, that means that you can work 3,000 kilometers on X, 10 meters or 12 meters or whatever. So we use GB2RS in the HF section really as a educational tool as much as anything. And we like to highlight, or I like to highlight the expeditions. I like to highlight events such as International Marconi Day, which is next week, to give people an idea of what they can work on what bands, and also to tell them that the changes that happen. For instance, the 10-meter band is not as good as it was, but this isn't really down to the solar flux level. It's due to the fact we're moving towards summer and MUFs come down in the summer due to a change in the ionospheric chemistry. So it's a chance to tell people, what is coming up, but also what they can expect. And the other one that I like to talk about in the winter is the low band conditions and the fact that you can work the states on 80-meter sideband, at or around sunrise or thereabouts, because a lot of people just don't realize that they can do that kind of thing. So there we are. So that's really the first bugbear I've got to confess, is that we know that if we give prediction figures, they're not going to be terribly accurate. But it's the best we can do. We can't get any better figures from anywhere else. So if anyone's got a solution to that one, do let me know. But so we use, just to recap, we use Shortwave Prediction Center in the States, and we use United States Air Force predictions as well. And generally just our own knowledge and looking at the sun. We use the stereo ahead spacecraft to see what's coming around the sun. I think I said this week or last week that the sun was nearly clear of spots. And lo and behold, 2 days later, one did arrive around the sun, which was we didn't see it coming, as it were. So we do our best anyway. And coronal mass ejections are massively important as well. They generally degrade conditions as the KP index goes up. And there is a coronal mass ejection prediction tool from the Space Weather Prediction Center. And it looks a bit like this. It's you can go and have a look at solarham.com and see this if you like. But it's a little bit like a garden sprinkler effect as the sun is expelling matter or plasma, actually. And it takes a couple of days to get here. So it predicts when and where conditions are going to be good or bad. So generally we can say, looking at this, yes, in 4 days' time, we expect the KP index goes up. And we're not too bad at that. I think that's it's one of the highlights of the report, that we do get it right better than we get it wrong, or more likely than get it wrong. And just to confirm, this is what a coronal hole is. The left-hand picture is the sun invisible light. On the right-hand side, that's the sun in extreme ultraviolet. And you can see these dark patches, which are really areas where there's open magnetic field lines, which allow plasma to flow out. So basically, I would say that coronal holes are bad for propagation, and they generally make the KP index go up as the plasma hits the Earth. And so we can tell from these that, if there is a large coronal hole on the sun's equator, then there's pretty certain that the matter from that, or the plasma from that, is going to hit the Earth. So, these are all tools that we have to bring in to have a look at. This is a graph of the number of geomagnetic storms per year. And as you can see, it varies widely from nothing in 2009, or virtually nothing, right the way up to 120 days in 2003. And generally, as we go down from sunspot maximum, this tends to get worse. So this means we've got more storms coming, I'm afraid. There's a report this week, by the way, that sunspot maximum may be coming earlier than we thought. Mr. McIntosh, or Dr. McIntosh in the States, is now saying that sunspot maximum may now be later this year. They were saying 2025, even maybe 2026 earlier. So this is something we're keeping an eye on, because it's now looking that sunspot maximum might become later this year or maybe early next year. We'll have to see. But basically, this says that, yes, we are going to get more geomagnetic storms as we pass sunspot maximum. So, if you thought we've had some bad geomagnetic storms recently, it's probably going to get worse. And what can that do to the Earth? Well, this is a graph of the KP index, which is a measure, of course, of unsettled geomagnetic conditions. And this was in 2003. So you can see we had over 3 days of very, very bad conditions with the KP index up to 9. Great for aurora, visible aurora, okay, as well from the UK. Not so good for HF, which generally depletes the ionosphere and pushes the critical frequency and therefore the maximum usable frequency down. So these are not good, but this is the sort of thing we can expect probably more of as we head towards maximum, and then generally definitely more of as we go past maximum as well. The other data I use a lot is ionoson data from our Rutherford Alpson Laboratory in Chiltern, RAF Fairford, and Dorb in Belgium as well. And this is a typical ionoson plot, which is showing us that the critical frequency, that is, if we fire a signal straight up into the atmosphere or the ionosphere, and what frequency is it where it still comes back down again? And there you can see it's about, I think it's 6.325 megahertz. So these are very useful to tell us, because from that we can extrapolate and say, okay, this means over 3,000 kilometers, we expect an MUF, a maximum usable frequency of about 20 megahertz. So they're very, very useful things, but they're not easy to read. And obviously these come up every kind of 15 minutes. So Jim Bacon, G3YLA, took this data and we discussed a lot of ideas, and he came up with something called PropQuest. And PropQuest actually plots the critical frequency in real time. So from this, the critical frequency is the red channel you can see at the bottom there. And then he's got these extrapolated 100, 500, 1500 and 3000 kilometer plots at the top there. So you can see the effects of solar flares very easily because the MUF drops. But it's a terribly useful thing, and there's also an archive of these as well. So you can see, looking at this, that the MUF rises from sunrise, which is what you'd expect, peaking around about midday or slightly after, and then going down to sunset, and as the MUF then drops below, into nighttime. So again, this is one of the tools we use, PropQuest, a very useful tool to work out the critical frequency, which is in itself is not terribly useful, but if you then extrapolate that to 100 kilometers and 3,000 kilometers, you can work out the sort of distances that you can work on various bands. And this also explains why sometimes when we've got low sunspot numbers, maybe you can't work somebody on 80 meters, 100 miles away, but you can hear Europe, and you think, well, that's weird. Why is that? Well, Europe on 80 meters would be a lot lower angle of takeoff needed to work Europe compared with around the UK. And this shows it in detail as to what's going on. And it just means that the critical frequency is too low to work NVIS or near vertical incidence sky wave contacts around the UK. But you can work further afield. You could work Europe or even further than that. So it's, again, a nice tool to have, and one that we use a lot. We use the vocap.com online program now, and Propi. I'll show you the Propi URL in a minute. These are excellent tools to make propagation predictions of what's going on. And again, part of the armory of tools we've got for GB2RS. For instance, I can tell you now that maybe in November you were working lots and lots of Americans on 10 meters, but you may be finding that's now dying out as propagation shifts, because the sun is now going, it's above the equator now, isn't it? And as we head towards summer, you probably find that as from March, it was quite good for north-south paths. And then as we get further into the summer and the summer anomaly, as it were, MUFs come down, and 10 meters may not be so good for long distance work, but then come again September, it will improve again. So these are things you can all show yourself with vocap or Propi. And that's both useful tools, I think, with GB2RS propagation report. This is a vocap propagation prediction from mine to New York. And it just shows you that you can work there from around about midday. When was this? This is all April, beg your pardon. You could work the New York from the UK from roughly midday to maybe 6 o'clock in the evening on around about, well, that was about 20 meters. Yeah, 14 megahertz, maybe 15 meters. So again, it's very useful to use the VOCAP point-to-point predictions or the PROPI point-to-point predictions to work out the best times to work places. And PROPI also has, well, they both have an area prediction, so it shows you don't have to do point-to-point. It will show you from your your location, your QTH, how far you can work on what band as well. So that's HF really. Now, what about VHF? Well, this is where we go over to Jim, G3YLA, who supplies the VHF weather model report, really. And he says there's a huge amount of weather data out there, and he needs to extract what matters for propagation. And he concentrates on well-supported indicators. And they have long lead times up to 10 days, and he has multiple runs of the model. Now, just to give you an idea, Jim owned, I think, or was a part owner of WeatherQuest, which is a professional meteorologist organization in Norwich, based at the University of East Anglia. So he has access to more data than I can shake a stick at. In fact, he can tell you within about 5 minutes when it's going to rain. So that's actually can be useful at times. But he was saying to me, well, yeah, this is an example, he said, of looking for tropospheric enhancement. And the chart on the left is a one-day advanced chart of whether we might get tropo on VHF. And then the one on the right, I think he calls it a spaghetti diagram, is a 12-day report on where we're going to have or could have tropospheric enhancement. So it just shows you the complexity of this. So you have to break it down a little bit and look at daily charts to work out the best times. This is, by the way, is a vertical profile, a temperature profile. So it's very useful for working out if we're going to have temperature inversions. That's where it gets warmer as you get higher in the atmosphere, not colder. So from this, he can work out the best days for tropospheric enhancements around the UK. So again, this is another example here of looking at tropospheric enhancements. And he's saying that a timeline for any given location is a good way to see any changes in the week. So it might be better for maybe Scotland on Tuesdays or Wednesday. And also not so good maybe later in the week. And also where the propagation is going to lie, where the direction is to go. And also is looking at thunderstorms as well over the next week. So I know people like to complain about weather forecasting has not always been accurate, which I know winds him up no end. But so I think with Jim, we're trying to predict over the next 7 days or 10 days in our case, really, what days are we likely to get better tropospheric events, and where are you likely to be able to work? For instance, I know from what he said this week is that next week should be a better opportunity for should be better opportunities for tropospheric enhancement, and it's all coming from these charts really. So much better weather next week, I think, and back time too, I might say. And other charts we can get, well, the William Hepburn charts shows where they expect, or where he expects tropospheric enhancements to go to. I think here the redder it is, or is the more likely it is for tropospheric enhancements. So you can see there that it's not terribly good for the UK, but down in Biscay and that neck of the woods, at this particular point, there were good opportunities for tropospheric enhancements as well. And we mentioned, or in the AGM, we mentioned F5LEN, who's just won an award, a propagation award, the Les Barkley Propagation Award, for his work on VHF predictions. So there's another good site here for charts to show you where you are likely to get tropospheric enhancements on VHF. And again, the URL at the bottom there, tropo.f5len.org, is another good one to use. And another one there, PropQuest. We're looking at Sporadic E now. Now, generally, Sporadic E, the Sporadic E season in the UK runs from about May to the end of August. We've not seen much of it yet, but as we head into May, so maybe another couple of weeks' time, you'll start to see 10 meters and 6 meter Sporadic E opening up. And Jim is an expert on this as well, and uses data from the 300 megabyte jet stream information charts to plot where he thinks Sporadic E openings might occur to. Sporadic E, I haven't really got time to go into it in too much detail here, but it's not solar related as such. It's meteoric debris in the upper ionosphere or upper atmosphere even, and it's wind shear that pushes these ions together into clumps. And so you get intense Sporadic E openings, but they're very hard to predict, and they move very, very quickly as well. So this is, Jim does a blog every day in the Sporadic E season, and there's Sporadic E charts on propquest.co.uk as well. So again, another useful resource for Sporadic E information. What about meteor scatter? Well, these are pretty well known as to when the big ones are going to be. So this is a list of the main showers that occur and when. And so this is useful information that comes from John as well and gets factored into GB2RS. So I think at the moment, where are we? There it's, yeah, night of April the 21st. So there we go. That's the next big meteor shower. We can expect some meteor action there. Okay, so let's finally go on to Moonbounce. So John and Sam, G4DDK, and John, G4BAO, look after the Moonbounce content for GB2RS as well. But one term we use an awful lot is the terms apogee and perigee. This is because the moon isn't in a circular orbit. It's in a slightly elliptical orbit. So there are times when the moon is further away than it is when it's at perigee. And so apogee is away, and that's the way I remember it, as apogee has an A and so is away. So apogee is the furthest point from Earth, in this case 406,000 kilometers. And then at perigee, when it's a lot closer, 357,000 kilometers. So there is quite a difference. And when the moon is at apogee, it's about 17%, sorry, 12 or 17, I can't read it myself, 12% smaller than when it's at perigee. So that's the first term that I do explain it every now and again, but not every week. But this is why it is important to know whether the moon is at apogee or perigee. Obviously, perigee a lot closer, so that the losses go down a little bit. So that's the good time to do, Moonbounce. But also where it is in the sky. This is something I didn't really understand until recently. I was talking to John about it, and he helped explain it to me, that as you scan across the sky, there are certain parts of the sky that have are quite noisy in a way, have a different sky temperature. So, for instance, there you've got Sagittarius, Cygnus, and Cassiopeia, I think, which are quite noisy. And so this gives us a sky temperature, if you like, of noise for Moonbounce. So this program here is from VK3UM and very useful. Now, John jokes that he can do the Moonbounce report for GB2RS months in advance if need be, because nothing ever changes. He just has to run it through the program and to report the data that comes up. So he's got an advantage on us, I think, really, but there we are. But this explains why. And obviously, as the moon heads towards new moon, then there's a point where you're getting severe noise off the sun as well. So that's not good for Moonbounce. But I think if you are doing anything with EME, absolutely look at VK3UM software, because it's very, very useful. not only for telling you where the moon is, but also where it is in the sky. So in terms of the sky noise that you're going to get, and where it is compared to the sun as well. So very useful tool. This is another piece of software. This is Moonscared software by GM4JJJ, and there's the URL at the bottom if you want to get hold of it. I mean, this is not a propagation or an EME propagation talk, really. It's just trying to show you some of the stuff we use and where to get more information from. But it's very interesting, actually, to read about this. So you know what apogee and perigee are now. That's the main thing. So at this point, I'll put it over to any questions. And just as an opportunity to just push a couple more videos we've got, understanding HF propagation and understanding VHF propagation, are videos that I put together a few years ago now, but they're still very, very current. And they're on the RSGB website, I think, or the RSGB YouTube site anyway. And if you've got any questions, you can always send them to me to psc.chairman@rsgb.org. And as I said, this presentation, I've just uploaded it to g0kya.blogspot.co.uk. So that's there as well. But so that's really the final slide for the presentation. And I'll open it up to questions now, David, if that's okay with you.
Yes, thanks very much, Steve. Yes, rather than email Steve questions, why not ask them now on YouTube chat if you're watching this on Saturday, April 15th. We've had a few, but it's a great opportunity to do that now. You can enter them on YouTube chat and we'll ask Steve them in a moment. We've had a couple already. First from Ed M0MNG, who says, I'm more a VHF person really, but I'm going to make an effort to be more active on HF during May and June for the coronation prefix. Are there any bands and times of day that you'd particularly recommend for interesting or unusual paths and contacts? Really interesting talk. Keep up the great work. And by the way, he puts there a PS during May and June, he means.
Yeah, okay. So May and June, first thing I would say is that they are both months which are very good for sporadic E. So I would give you attention to 10 meters and 6 meters, definitely. For sporadic E contacts. Sporadic E gives you very strong contacts on 10 meters. The only problem is that the distances involved are generally up to about 2,000 kilometers, I think. And you can't really say which way the sporadic E is going to go. Now, Jim, obviously, with his blog, will give you some indication of where you can expect sporadic E to be running, as it were. But generally, for instance, you could work down into Italy, out as far as what should we say? Yeah, Finland, Sweden. That's that kind of Norway, that kind of direction. Every now and again, you may get multi-hop sporadic E and maybe get to the States, but that is rarer. But single-hop sporadic E is a good option, I think. So looking at 10 meters would be the best option. Having said that, you don't just get sporadic E on 10 meters. It goes right the way down as well. It's just we generally don't always think of sporadic E as being a 20-meter propagation mode because it's confused with the F2 stuff as well. So yeah, so you can get sporadic E contacts down to 20 meters as well, absolutely. So what else we see? Well, it's starting to be a bad time for HF. MUFs generally come down in the summer due to a change in the ionospheric chemistry. So as I said, you may find that while 10 meters is good for sporadic E, it's not so good for F2 layer. So you might find some of the more distant stuff a little more difficult to come by. But 20 meters should be open quite nicely. 17 meters should be open quite nicely, and 15 should be open with the current sunspot point as well. Then after dark, I would say 40 meters and 80 meters start to come into their own as well. The thing about HF is that in the summer, I said MUFs, daytime MUFs generally are lower, but they are generally higher at night. So you may get to the point in June where 20 meters actually stays open all night. So people often think, oh, well, the sun's gone down, I won't bother with 20 anymore because that's closing down. But no, it doesn't work like that. We actually end up with maybe propagation on 20 meters, 24 hours a day. So I think if that helps, yeah, certainly have a look at a propagation prediction program like VOACAP, like PROPI. If you just Google PROPI propagation, that will take you to, I think it's soundbites.asia is the URL. But that's one of the programs that we recommend. It was produced in connection with the Propagation Studies Committee. And, you know, they're both, to be honest, they're different models, but they kind of come up with similar results. And both will argue that theirs is better than the others, but there we go. But they're both very useful tools. But that's the way to find out where you are likely to be able to work. And at what time of day. So it depends on what time of day you can actually operate and what bands you have available.
Indeed, thanks, Steve. Actually, Andy Cowley, 2E0REE, has put that he's been working 10 meters every day for 2 months. So
yeah.
Maybe, Andy, you could just quickly share with us on your YouTube chat, you know, what bands and where you've been operating. That would be good to share with everybody. Don't forget. Sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, the way 10 meters have been running with the solar flux up there in the kind of 140s, 150s, 10 meters has been brilliant. But what I'm saying is that you may find that it now starts to tail off towards the summer. I know that we've not quite had so much transatlantic propagation on 10 meters. That has tailed off a little bit since maybe February, March time. But if it starts to die off a little bit, don't be surprised, because that's the way it goes. But you've got Sporadic E to look forward to, so it's a good time to get your European country count up a little bit as well.
Indeed, yes. Actually, your colleague, John G4BAO, has put a comment on here as well. He said, with EME, need to also remember moon declination. That determines the rise and set azimuth, how long the moon is visible and how high it reaches in the sky. This varies over the lunar month. And he says that enhanced tropo is rare, he should have added as well. He's also commented on something else, so I'll ask you another question here. Stuart, G2RS, has asked, on VHF and above, what is the relative importance of tropo enhancement versus aircraft scatter?
Right. Okay.
I can, by the way, I can, just for an extra point, as they say, I can help you a little bit with something John said, and I ought to put that in because he's also tried to help you with that. John has said, Stuart, aircraft scatter is always there. Tropo is just a rare weather phenomenon. But anyway, I'm over to you, Steve, for your part.
Well,
of the answer.
yeah, I mean, these people are doing aircraft scatter. It's not something I'd really look at. I think the thing about aircraft scatter is you can kind of tell which direction it's going to come from, but you've got to get the frequency right to scatter off aircraft, and it doesn't last very long as well. So that's one way of looking at it. Perhaps we should get someone to give a talk on aircraft scatter. That would be good. Tropospheric propagation. Well, the trouble is that the weather has been so rotten that we haven't had much tropospheric propagation, but I have it on good authority, i.e. Jim, that next week should be a lot better. So maybe next week is the time to start looking for tropospheric propagation or paths to open up. And yes, John, thank you very much. I didn't mention declination. I thought it was maybe too much for this one. But yeah, that's where the sun is, the moon is in relation to the ecliptic, I think. But those programs I mentioned both will tell you the moon's declination. Where is it above the horizon, basically, effectively, anyway. So yeah, thanks, John.
Yes, thanks, John and Steve, for that answer. Paul Nichols, M0PVN, says, what is the longer term forecast for HF? When are we expecting the next peak? Golden question, I bet.
Oh, well, yes. Depends who you talk to. I mean, the NASA prediction panel originally thought it would be 2025, maybe 2026. But just this week, Scott McIntosh, Dr. Scott McIntosh has come up with his prediction, which says it could be as early as later this year or early next year, which is a little bit worrying in a way. But we'll have to see. I mean, Scott McIntosh is a solar physicist, and he's got some excellent ideas that he's put forward in terms of how the sun works, which is new. I know that talking to people, his work is very valued. So we have to listen to that. But the thing is, sunspot maximum, you never know you're there until you've gone past it in a way. But I think that at this point in the sunspot cycle, we've still got fun to come. We've still got more to come, and don't worry too much. But definitely this year is good. I think this October, November could be fantastic. And then, October, November, maybe December as well. They are probably the best months for HF propagation in the Northern Hemisphere. So definitely that would be a good time. Next year, again, we got the spring, maybe February, March, April, springtime there. And then we'll have to see. I think we'll have to review where we are at that point, because it may be that at that point we're past solar maximum. It may be that we've got another year to go. But it's looking interesting that some of the experts are now suggesting that, solar maximum is coming a bit earlier than we thought.
It does feel a bit of a shock, doesn't it, Steve? It feels like a bit like when you have the summer and then suddenly it's over and you think, what happened?
It's exactly what it's like.
And we've been waiting for this solar cycle 25. It seems like for years, to me anyway. We've done lots of webinars predicting the cycle. And so what do you personally think, though? I know that Scott McIntosh and lots of other people talking about. What are your own feelings?
Oh, Lordy. That's a difficult one, because I think you can only really go on what you can see in terms of what the sun is doing. It did look a little bit like we had a peak a few months back, and it's tailed off a little bit. But that's not unusual. I mean, it never ever goes up smoothly. So I think we're maybe coming up for another surge in solar activity again. It's just a case of getting that surge when conditions are going to work for you. I mean, traditionally, HF propagation is never terribly good. Maybe June, July, and August. As I said, not terribly good times. Come October and November, you'll work across the states on 10 meters every day. So we'll have to see. So it depends where you want to work in the world, for example, and what band you want to work. Honestly, if you want to work the states maybe on 80 meters or 40 meters, then the winter is a better time to do that. So that's not answering your question, really, is it? What do I think? Well, look, the sun has been doing what it's been doing for millions of years, and nothing we can do will change that. So it's a case of just trying to look at what the sun is doing and try and work out trends from that. And the trend generally has been that solar cycles have been going down a little bit. Now, Scott McIntosh himself predicted a couple of years ago that this solar cycle was going to break all records. Well, he seems to be gone a bit quiet about that now. So we'll have to see. That's not an insult to Scott, by the way. It's just an observation. But in a word, then, so solar cycle 25 should peak 2025, maybe a little bit earlier. So you're in the right place anyway. You're on the upward side of the solar cycle. I mean, when I used to do GB2RS year after year after year with solar flux numbers at 68 and 69, not a spot to be seen anywhere. No, it's much better.
When you're talking, I was wondering if apparently if you're a doctor or you're a GP at a party, you're always asked the obvious questions. If you're at a social gathering of radio amateurs, do you get asked a lot about propagation or even blamed when you maybe haven't forecast it quite right?
Well, I think, funny enough, you do. At the Newark Hamfest, the most commonly asked question, other than where's the toilets, I don't know why I was always asked where the toilets were. I must attract people. Seriously, every other question was where the toilets. But usually is where are we in the solar cycle? What can we expect? So I think we're on top of that now. And it's funny you should say that. Yeah.
It must be, you've got to stop wearing clothes like a janitor, I think, probably. Anyway, Steve, we've got just one more question left here, and I've got something to ask you. But if you have been putting off asking a question on YouTube chat, this is the time to do it, please. Andy actually has come back, 2E0REE. I asked what contacts he'd been making, and he says, I was working ZL in China, all the American states, and all of Southern America, and that was on 10 meters or 15 to 6. And also working South Africa on 4 meters in the last week from Portsmouth. So that's quite a list, isn't it?
That's quite a list. That's quite impressive, actually. I'm not surprised. Yeah, the propagation on 10 is shifting slightly from North America to South America at the moment. And I think around the equinox times, say March 21st or thereabouts, it's also a good time for the north-south parts like South Africa as well, and away from North America. So that's a really good set of results. And I would be very surprised if he wasn't using a beam. That would be good if he could just tell us, were you using a beam? Because I wouldn't be surprised if he was, to be honest. See if he puts that in the chat.
Yeah, we'll see if we can get to that. John has just come back actually and said, observation on Andy's comment, the southern part of the UK, which obviously Portsmouth is, favours 6 metres and 4 metres probably to South Africa. So there we are.
Yeah.
I mean, this is quite... just again, asking everybody at home now, we have come virtually to the end of this webinar, so if you've got any questions or comments to make, please do them now. I mean, this is quite an onerous thing for you, really, isn't it? And you and your team to do this every single week. I haven't actually seen ever a week where it hasn't been from your team. You started on a Thursday, I think you said, is when you really start working on it to publish on the Friday.
I mean, the first one I did took me about 2 hours, and I thought, this isn't going to work. We've got to speed it up. So now it's about half an hour. But we just rely on each other. I mean, Jim does his bit. John does his bit, I add my bit, and I give it a read through, just make sure it makes sense. Then it goes to Ed, RSGB, and he queries things sometimes, which is quite right, and we sometimes use terms. He says, what the hell does that mean? I thought, well, yeah, that's a good point. So yeah, it is an onerous task, and we do have some cover for holidays and whatever, but generally I've done it while I've been, I used to work away an awful lot abroad. But I'm kind of semi-retired now, so it's not so bad. But yeah, I used to do it in airports and things like that. So yeah, wow. But I don't think we've missed a deadline yet. But the thing is, it's got to be ready to go out on Friday. So that's the way it goes.
Yeah, it's an amazing commitment from you and your team. Thank you for what you do, because I know a lot of radio amateurs. It's probably one of the most important things they read from the GB2RS news every week is to see what they might be doing and where they might be working in their hobby. So really important. Thank you, Steve, and say your colleagues as well. Andy has put a note following up on your question. He says, no beams, vertical and long wires. That's all, he said. So,
well, that's really good. I mean, that just shows you to work the DX, you've got to be on the band. And he's obviously taking that to heart. But yeah, 10 meters has been fantastic, having been quiet for years and years, really. And I hope it continues. But I expect that he'll probably find it dulls down a little bit over the summer, other than sporadic E contacts, but then pick up again in maybe September. So the really long distance stuff will come back again in September.
And I guess the message is really, especially if Dr. Scott McIntosh is correct, and we should be making the most of this year for our contacts and everything, as we might be towards the peak.
Well, yes, I mean the last sunspot maximum, I kind of missed it. It was picking up quite nicely and just died really. And I thought, well, yeah, where did I go wrong there? I didn't really work that much, but yeah, get on the air, absolutely.
And John G4BAO has just said the difference between East Anglia and the South Coast is quite remarkable, but I don't think I'm moved just yet. But anyway. Steve, many thanks for you for both for this presentation, giving us an insight on what your team does, but also to thank you and your team for doing this every week for us radio amateurs. Many thanks, Steve, for today's talk.
My pleasure.
Thank you. We are, and that concludes this special webinar. And thanks once again to our presenter, Steve Nichols, G0KYA. Well, we hope you've enjoyed this event, and a tip that if you've subscribed to the RSGB's YouTube channel, you'll be notified of other webinars, videos and presentations from the Society on a wide range of amateur radio topics. Until next time, this is David G7URP wishing you a very good afternoon and signing off and clear. Bye-bye.